Hello, everyone. Happy Hump Day. Happy Wednesday. Today, May 20th, 2020. We'll get started here in just a second. Let me know if you can hear me okay. The audio is coming through. Hello, Montse, Oralis, Paulina, Wendy. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hello, Stacy. Good afternoon. Caro, hello.
Hi, teacher.
Let me know, guys, if you can hear me. You can either reply in the chat or just unmute your microphone. Yes. Okay, great. Great. All right. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I want to give us enough time today for today's activity. I had a chance to look through your questions from yesterday's activity where you uploaded to your individual wiki questions that came directly from your interviews. And so you were asked to create a list of direct questions that came from the interview. And today what I'd like to do is I took some sample questions that I would like for us to take a look at today. And I'm going to be asking how you might reword the question, right? Looking at some samples, some examples here, and seeing how we can restructure the question, thinking about the word order, the verb tenses, vocabulary in general, and seeing how we can, in some cases, restructure the question in order for it to be a little bit clearer. So today what I'd like to do is work in the virtual classroom. So although I'm sharing my screen now, you can either, it's probably easiest to go directly into the virtual classroom. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen. And if you scroll down under week 13 in the virtual classroom, under activities, you should see a chat called Direct Questions Feedback Chat. Okay, so if you click on this button, this should open up into another screen where you have another link that says click here to enter the chat now. Okay, once you click there, it should open up the chat. And once you've entered the chat, if you could just say hello, just so that I know that you are in and you know how to send a message within the chat. So I'll give you guys a second here if you can try to go into the chat. Again, there's really no need to look at my screen if you can, as long as you can hear me and then we're all in the chat, that'll be fine. Hello, Paulina, you've made it. Oralis has made it. Great. I'll give you guys a moment to enter into the chat in the virtual classroom. Okay, looks like Caro's made it, Monse. Great. Okay, Nigeli, hello. Wendy's made it, hello. All right, now if you're on your computer screen, I would open up the chat so it takes up the entire screen so that you can see as much information at a time as possible. And don't make the mistake that I made earlier this morning. I was asking for responses and I was getting responses, but I didn't see them because they occur at the bottom of the screen. And on my computer, the chat doesn't automatically view from the bottom. So I didn't realize that they were responding. So make sure that you're constantly scrolling down towards the bottom, if that is the case on your computer, so that you see all of the latest responses. Ideally, it would be nice to either have the most current at the top or even at the bottom, but you would automatically, they would automatically appear without you having to scroll. But at least on my computer, that's not possible. So just make sure that to get the latest messages that you're constantly scrolling down towards the bottom. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the first question. Now, these are all examples from your work. They're all examples of direct questions. And the task is to take a look at the question, and my question is going to be the same for you guys for each of the questions, the direct questions, is how would you, how else could you present this question? All right, so look at the grammar, look at the meaning of the question, and I would like for you to reword it if you have to, but try to keep the same question, the essence of the question, try to keep that the same. All right, so do try to use as many words as possible if those words contribute to a clear meaning. All right, so let's look at the first example, and we'll do this where I'll give you a couple of, a minute or so to write up your response, and then I'll count down so that we can submit all of our answers at the same time. So here is the first example. Again, make sure you scroll down to the bottom so that you can see the question. All right. Take a look at this question. I'll give you a moment. Go ahead and type out how you would change this question, keeping it basically as the same question, but how could you reword it? Okay, so let's count down 3, 2, 1. Post your response. How would you reword this question? If you're still completing your question, that's fine. Go ahead and hit enter whenever you're ready to post. How would you reword this direct question? What do you think? Any ideas, guys? How could you reword this question? You can begin with the how, right? So you want to keep it as a how question, right? How could you reword this question? Here we go. Okay, how could you know if you got infected or if you are infected? Okay. How would you know if you were infected? All right. So Paulina has the right idea towards the beginning of the sentence. How would you know if you were infected? Now, instead of the preposition of, what other preposition could you use instead? By, exactly. Right? So I would say, how would you know if you were infected by COVID-19? Now, there are two clauses here. You should recognize this as one of the four conditionals. So my question is, which conditional is it? And how would you write the question and change the order of the clauses? So which conditional is it? And how would you write the question changing the order of the clauses? What do you think? Second conditional? Is it a real conditional or an unreal conditional? And which verb tense is it representing? Present, past, or future? Anybody have an idea about how to change the order of the clauses? How would you do it? Okay, unreal. If it's an unreal conditional, does it express the present, past, or future? What do you guys think? How would you change the order? Anybody have any ideas? Okay, so you might begin, if you were infected by COVID-19, how would you know? Right? So we can change the order. This is the second conditional. It's an example of one type of second conditional. It is expressing an unreal or a hypothetical situation, because when you ask, how would you know if you were infected, right? It's a hypothetical because the person presumably does not have COVID-19. So you're saying, how would you know if you were infected? Right? Now, in this case, it's actually expressing the present tense, right? Because it's a hypothetical. It's a hypothetical in the present tense. Remember that the third conditional expresses the past tense. All right. Let's take a look at another example. Okay, now in this example, I want you to both look at the grammar, but also the meaning of it. Would you add or take out any words in order to clarify the meaning? Here's the second example. Think about how you could reword this question, thinking in terms of grammar, thinking in terms of meaning. I'll give you a moment. How else could you pose this question? Think about how you would ask this question to someone. How would you ask this to someone else? And feel free, in this case, to clarify the meaning, you could add a few extra words. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Post your response. What do you think? How would you reword this direct question? Any ideas? In this particular question, you could also change the question word, because remember, one of the suggestions I made was to try to avoid which questions, what questions, how long, right? So you could also try using a different question word. Any ideas? And there's several options here, right? There's not just one possible correct answer, right? There's many different ways that you could reword it. What do you think? Go ahead and post your responses once you've completed them. What do you think? Anybody have any suggestions about this one? Is this one difficult? Okay, can you mention some of the prevention measures? Okay, that's a good option. Paulina, anybody else? That's certainly a possible question. Anybody else? It doesn't matter if it's a mistake. Don't worry about that. Just try to think about how you would ask this question if you were going to ask it in your own interview. How would you frame the question? How would you present the question? Anybody else? Okay, so if there are prevention measures or, measures with, with an S, would you mention some of them? Or could you mention some of them? You could say that. Could you? Like, are you able to mention some of them? Would you mention some of them, perhaps? Right? Okay, so this is certainly a possibility. This is more of a conditional, but this is good. I would just add measures, plural. If there are prevention measures, would you mention some of them, or could you? Good. Anybody else? Here's one that came to mind for me. Which prevention measures do you take? Okay, this is also, and I just added the verb take, right? But notice the difference in the word order. All right, so let's do a comparison. All right, let's compare what I wrote. Which prevention measures do you take? Fernanda posts, if there are prevention measures, would you mention some of them, or could you mention? Look at that section. And also Paulina's, can you mention some of the prevention measures? So let's look at Paulina's example first. Can you mention? So we have can as an auxiliary. We have the subject, you, the pronoun, subject pronoun, and then we have the main verb, right? So we have auxiliary, subject, main verb. Now look at Fernanda's version. Would you mention some of them? Would, right, is an auxiliary. We have the subject, you, and we have the main verb, mention. Now in my example, I have a content word, which, and then I have the subject, and then I have do as an auxiliary, you as a subject, and take as the verb. But this is a which question. It's a little bit different, right? It's different than if you look at my example at the top. How would you know if you were infected by COVID? How would you know? How would you know? Here we have a question word, auxiliary, subject, and a verb. This is what I'd like for you guys to compare. Take a look at these examples and pay close attention to the word order. It depends if it's a content word. It depends if it's a which question with the word which at the beginning, right? And it also depends if it's a yes or no question, which we'll look at here in a minute. All right, let's take a look at another example. Okay, here's your next example. If you want to scroll down all the way to the bottom, take a look at this and ask yourself, how would you present this question? Okay, I'll give you a minute to type this out. And it's really important that everybody submits something. It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. It doesn't matter if your answer is the same as everyone else's. But try to respond to each one of these questions. Okay. I'll give you a countdown here in a minute. I'll give you a second. This is a little bit of a longer question. And in this example, try to take out, do you think? Or at least you think. Take out you think. Just remove that part from your question. How would you ask this question without saying you think? Pay close attention to the verb tense. You actually have a couple of options with regard to the verb tense. So think about which verb tense that you would like to use. Give you just a few more seconds. Make sure everybody responds. Now, it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. Doesn't matter if your answer is the same. But I would like everybody to respond. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Post your response. How would you ask this question? All right. Why would the government hide the real number of cases? I like that, Monse. I like that choice. Why would the government hide the real number of cases? Why would the government? Okay. Anybody else? Because there are other ways to do it. For which reasons the government is hiding the real numbers of cases? Okay. All right, so Andrea, I want you to take a look. We're going to look at a couple of different options, okay? And as we look at the different options and I explain, I want you to come back to your example and compare what you have versus the other. In this case, notice that we typically have some sort of either a question word like why, how, when, where, or we might have an auxiliary in the case that we saw earlier with can, for example. Can you mention some of the prevention measures? All right. So pay close attention to the first word. It's going to depend, of course, what kind of question it is. All right. If it's a yes, no question, are you tall? Is he tall? It could be the verb to be. Today, in this case, though, we're trying to avoid yes or no questions. All right. So in your case, for which reasons, try to think of a word that you could include to begin the question that addresses, again, one of the content words, one of the question words. Right. Right. And you're correct about the numbers. You want to say the real number of cases. That's correct. Wendy says, why is the government hiding the real statistics about COVID? Correct. With a question mark at the end. Very good. That's right. Anybody else? We have some of you not playing along. Please feel free to post your response. And it doesn't even matter if they posted the same as what you posted. If everybody has the same thing, that's fine. But are there any other ways that you could reframe this question, that is, reword this question? Anybody else? Anybody else? 3 people responding. What does that tell me? Very interesting. All right, I'm going to offer a suggestion, another way that you could write this question. Now, I know some of you are using would. Why is the government hiding? So in Wendy's case, which verb tense is she using? Why is the government hiding, right, the real statistics? Which verb tense is in that question? Which verb tense is that question in Wendy's example? Why is the government hiding the real statistics? Present continuous. That's right. Now, here's another way that you could ask the question. How did the government, change it to the past tense, how did the government hide the real number of cases? Right? So again, it's going to depend on which verb tense that you want. But grammatically, you could pose this question in the present tense, present continuous, or the past. If you want the present tense, how does the government hide? That could be also a possibility. Okay, so in this case, be careful with the verb tense. Let's look at another example. Okay, here I want everyone to respond, please. Everyone. Doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. Doesn't matter if your response is the same as everyone else's. Please respond. Here is your next sample direct question. How would you pose this question? How would you write out this question? Again, there are several options available. There's a lot of different ways that you can write this. How would you write it? I'll give you a moment before our countdown. Okay, hopefully everyone has prepared a response. Hopefully everyone will reply to your version of this question, this direct question. How would you reply? Countdown, 3, 2, 1. When you finish your question, hit reply. How this pandemic has affected your daily life. How the pandemic has affected your life. How do you think the pandemic impacted your life? How has the pandemic impacted your life? Now, for the purposes of this type of these questions, right? It's not necessary, although it's not incorrect, it's not necessary to say, how do you think? Or you think specifically. So we can remove you think, okay? But if we look at, if we compare Wendy's example, how has the pandemic impacted your life, right? That's a good option. How do you think the pandemic impacted your life? This is grammatically correct, but it has a slightly different meaning because it's in the past, right? The question is assuming that the pandemic is over, right? How do you think the pandemic impacted your life, right? So this is basically saying it's over, right? That it's not impacting your life anymore, but last week, last month, last year, how did it impact your life, right? So you wouldn't, by removing you think, you could say, how did the pandemic impact your life? All right, what about this one? How the pandemic. So here's what I want you to take a look at. Let's look at Wendy's example. Let's see, let's look at the others. How did COVID affect, all right, how did COVID-19, What about affected? Is it affected or affect? And what does it affect? Affect your life? All right. So I would say affect your life. How does the pandemic affect it? So be really careful, guys, with the verb tense. All right. In this example, again, let's go back to Wendy's example. We have the question word how, and I'm going to write my little formula here. All right. So we got the question word. I'm going to write this in the chat. Question word plus what comes after the question word? And in Wendy's example, how has the pandemic? So we have auxiliary verb plus the subject plus the main verb. The main verb or the lexical verb. All right, so take a look and make sure you have this someplace in your notes. Now, this doesn't apply to every single possible question, but this is a very common structure for forming open content questions, questions that begin with question words, like how and why and when and where. This is a very common pattern. All right, so it's one that you need to look over and remember whenever you're drafting most of these questions for this particular exercise. Okay, again, this doesn't apply to all types of questions, but certainly the question we're looking at, these apply. So we have a question word, right? So we have how. Then the auxiliary how has is going to be our auxiliary verb. How has the pandemic is our subject. How has the pandemic affected is the main verb, it's the lexical verb, and then your life. Okay. So make sure that you write this down someplace in your notes. Question. I should have put question word. Sorry. It's a question word followed by an auxiliary verb, followed by a subject, followed by a main or lexical verb. Okay, this is going to be the main structure. And you look at a lot of these examples and they have it, right? They have how did the pandemic affect your life? That's good. That's a good example. We have how is the question word. This is Nigeli's example. Did is auxiliary verb. The pandemic is our subject, and affect is the main verb. All right. So pay close attention to the structure, the organization of the words. All righty. Let's take a look now. Let's do a hard one. All right, let's take a look at this one. Now, this one's a little different. Actually, this is an easy one. This one actually is stated as a yes/no question followed by the question word why. It's a two-part question. We want to change this because we want to try to avoid yes/no questions for this activity. So here's the example. And because the second question, the word why, or the question word why, is or follows the yes or no question, I would like for you to write one content question starting with why that includes the rest of this information in this example. Okay, so how would you write this question beginning with why and including most of the rest of the words here? I'll give you a few minutes. Again, for the purposes of this question, let's assume the person agrees. All right, he or she agrees with the actions going against COVID. This was an easy one. Everybody should reply to this one. Everyone. How many do we have in here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 or 13 of us. We should have about 13 replies. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Why do you agree with the actions against COVID? You're probably asking, why didn't we start with this one, right? This is the easy one. But look at the structure. It's the same. Why is our question word. Do is our auxiliary. You is our subject. And agree is our verb, right? Same pattern. All right, same pattern. Let's look at another one. Oh, this one's an easy one. I started off with the hard ones. Now take a look at this one. How would you ask this question? Everybody should reply to this one also. This is pretty easy. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Your response. How would you respond? Okay, I'm looking at Paulina's. How did you feel about the quarantine? Good. How do you feel during the quarantine? That's also acceptable. Now, how do you feel during the, okay, so present tense, right? That's fine. So we have an example of present tense and past tense. How do you feel about, that's fine, Wendy, just I would add the article, right? So how do you feel about the quarantine? How do you feel about the current quarantine? Okay, that's good too, Oscar. How do you feel about the quarantine? Good, Odalis, very good. Okay, that wasn't too bad. Here's another one. This is not too difficult either. But again, now we have a two-part question. So now we want to reword this question into one, starting with how. How would you do it? I'll give you a moment. Now, in this example, you may decide to omit certain words. Don't feel that you have to include all the words if it becomes ungrammatical or becomes awkward. All right. Countdown. 3, 2, 1. Your response? How can animals get sick by the virus? How can animals get sick of the virus? How can animals get infected by the virus? Okay, I like that one, Wendy. It changes a little bit, right? But that's fine. It's certainly, this is grammatically correct. How can animals get sick of? How can animals get sick? How can animals got sick? All right, so Liz said, pay close attention to the verb tenses, right? And try to keep clear with when a verb is functioning as an auxiliary and when it's functioning as The main verb of the sentence, right? In this case, got sick is a phrasal verb, right? It's kind of a reflexive verb. Okay. But make sure that I guess my question, Lisette, and for everyone, which verb indicates the tense? Which verb indicates present tense or past tense or future tense, especially when you have a compound verb? That is the question, right? And when you're looking at these other examples, Lisette, think about which verb indicates the verb tense, past, present, or future. How can animals get infected? So look at this example. How can animals, which verb tense are we talking about? The present tense. Why? How do we know that? Because of can. Now, the rest of the verbs have to be in the base form, right? We have to say get infected. How can animals get sick? Now, here's another thing I want to ask you guys about the preposition. Now, some of you are saying get infected by the virus. That's fine. There's another preposition, though, that we can use instead of, right? If we go back here, how can animals get sick of the virus? When you get sick of something, it's basically saying that you can't tolerate it, right? If you get sick of a person, you're like, oh, I don't want to talk to that person. I'm sick of this person. I'm sick of the pandemic. I'm sick of COVID-19. I'm like, I'm up to here. It's not that I'm infected. It's, yeah, I don't want to deal with COVID-19. I've had it, right? I'm done. I want to go back to work. I want to go back to my classes and see my students, right? You're sick of something. Now, what's another preposition? How can you say, how can animals get sick? Now, which preposition could we use instead of? From. That's right. They get sick from the virus, right? We have a lot of people get sick from the virus. How would you know if animals are in danger? How would you know if animals are in danger? Okay, so it's up, you're good up to that point, Oscar. And then to get infected, I would change the rest of that. You could say, how would you know if animals were in danger of getting infected by COVID-19? All right, so that's how I would kind of include the rest of your phrasing there. How can animals infect? How can animals, Nigeli, get infected by the virus? Okay. Yes, and Wendy, you're correct. The auxiliary verb, right? The first auxiliary verb is the one that's going to indicate the verb tense, present, past, or future. All right, let's do one more. I think it's getting easier for you guys. Let's look at, this last example. All right, how would you write this question? How would you ask this question in your own interview? I'll give you a moment. How would you rewrite this question? In this example, I want you to pay close attention to not only word order, but also the verb phrase. The verb phrase. In order to understand the verb phrase, we also need to understand the subject of the sentence. So start there. What's the subject? What's the verb phrase? If it helps, write the sentence out as a declarative sentence. Instead of a question, write it out as a statement. All right, but let's look at your answers. All right, so here we go. 3, 2, 1. Post your responses. How has your life changed since this pandemic began? Since this pandemic began. Okay, good. Since this pandemic began, how, all right, so you could start that way. Since this pandemic began, how, ¿qué más? Odalis, how? What's the word order? How has your life changed since this pandemic started? Good, Monse? How did your life change since this pandemic started? Good, Marifer? All right. So this is what I want you to think about, the not only the word order, but in this case, the verb phrase. Which verb tense are we dealing with in this example? Any ideas? Which verb tense are we using? Most of you are using. Present perfect. Present perfect. How do we form the present perfect? Well, what's the subject of this sentence? How would you write this out? Let's do it real quickly. How would you write this out as a sentence? Instead of a question, write it out as a statement. I'll do the same. How would you write this question out as a statement, as a declarative sentence? So instead of a question, we want now a statement. Start with the subject, then the verb phrase, then maybe an object or another phrase. Any ideas? Yeah, and you can go ahead and hit enter. You don't have to wait for the countdown. Your life has changed since the pandemic started. All right, that's right. So if it helps when you guys are thinking about your questions, look at it from different points of view. Look at it as a question, look at it as a statement, right? And try to be careful with not only the word order, but also the verb phrase. Is an auxiliary. What about the verb? What verb form do we need? And for the lexical verb, is it the verb in the base form? Is it the verb in the past participle, the present participle, etc.? Okay, guys, I think we're going to stop there for today. And I hope that this gave you a little bit more exposure, a little bit more practice looking at your direct questions. For next class, take another look at the questions that you included in your wiki. See if there are any changes that need to be made. Even if you ask the question differently in your interview, that's fine. At this point, I would like for you to take another look at the direct questions. And if you have not done so already, please include the responses to those questions in your wiki. And tomorrow we're going to take another look at those direct questions and think about now indirect questions and looking at the structure of both again. All right. So we want to get more familiar with the word order. That's the key term for today, is the word order for the questions, primarily the question word plus auxiliary verb plus the subject plus the main verb. That's the main organizational pattern for forming these types of questions that you're asked to complete. Okay, so again, take another look at your questions. The second big point or the big takeaway from today's class, besides the word order, is the verb clause, the verb tense, and the structure of the verb, right? If there's an auxiliary What about the main verb? Does it come in the base form, past participle, present participle, etc.? All right, any questions, guys, regarding direct questions or any of the examples that we talked about today? Okay, if there are no more questions, then what I would, my last recommendation as we finish today's class, this morning I recorded Prope A. We did the same activity, but we used totally different examples. So you might benefit if you want to look at some of those examples and compare those with the examples that we saw today in class. If you feel like you need a little bit more explanation or want to see more examples, you can take a look at what they did and how they answered some of their questions. And I'm going to tell them the same tomorrow. I might even post something for them to look at our video that we created today in our class. Again, so that you guys are looking at as many different examples as possible, right? This was the idea, is to share different examples with both Propes so that we would have two recordings with as many examples as possible. And again, all of these examples came from what you provided in your individual wikis. Okay, so finally, a few of you have not uploaded anything to the wiki. If you haven't done so already, please upload before next class the information from your interviews. Okay, guys, I think we'll stop there and enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see everybody tomorrow. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.